It's Wulf, and it's the long-awaited video about my favorite console. So, my favorite console is the PlayStation 3. I know it's probably not a super big surprise given that most of the videos I've made on this channel have been about PS3 games, but it really is. I mean, I play PlayStation 3 so much, I can't believe that that console came out over a decade ago. And I mean, I literally, I still play PlayStation 3 like at least once a week. It's just by far the console that I've spent the most time playing. It's not the first console that I had when I was growing up. The first console that I ever had that was like my own console was the PlayStation 2, but I got the PlayStation 3 when I was still pretty young, and I mean, I've just always played it. I think it's just one of those things where I played it so much when I was like in elementary school, in middle school, in high school, and it was just the main console for a lot of my childhood and early teen years, and it has an amazing library and everything. And so in this video, I'm just going to spend a while talking about it. The way that I'm planning on setting this video up is I'm going to pretty much give you guys like a walk around of the console. Originally, I was going to do this part in real time with the console in my hands physically with like real life video, but I just couldn't get it to work. So instead, I just took a bunch of pictures of my PS3, and I'm just going to kind of point out different things on the console and talk about why they're notable or cool. And at points, I'm going to jump to clips of like screen recordings of the console where I'm showing different things actually happening on the PlayStation 3. And also, I want to note, the main competitor of the PlayStation 3 when it was out was the Xbox 360, and the Xbox 360 is an awesome console as well. Before I get started talking about the actual PlayStation 3, I also want to mention, so how much do I like the PlayStation 3? So much that I own 3 of them. So this is the very first PlayStation 3 I ever owned. It is not exactly a launch model because if I remember right, I got it the same year that the PlayStation 3 came out, but it took me a while to get it. It was a Christmas present because I was a little kid, and it's one of the bigger models of PS3. It is not the one that's backwards compatible though. I'm going to talk about the backwards compatibility stuff in a little while, but it's one of the ones that came out really early on in the PS3's life cycle, and I don't exactly remember the hard drive capacity or anything, but it lasted me like a decade pretty much. This PlayStation was working fine for a really long time. Eventually though, it got the yellow light of death, and I'd like to try to repair it because I have some really cool stuff on the hard drive of that console. I think I've got like some delisted games and stuff, which I know you can re-download some of those, but I've got some of those. I've also got some cool pictures I took from PlayStation Home back when that was still around on there that I think would be fun to maybe use in a video eventually or something. And I mean, that was my main PS3 for a really long time, and I hope I can get it fixed eventually. Then, when that PlayStation broke 10 years later, as another gift, another family member of mine got me this PS3. It's a PS3 Super Slim, and it worked for a while, but it was actually one of the ones like used from GameStop, and it still kind of works, but not exactly. The disc drive in it is really loud actually, and the disc drive works, but something just seems off about it. And I also ran into this weird glitch one time where the fans would just kick up to like maximum speed out of nowhere. It doesn't seem to do that anymore because I've messed around with it a few times since then, but I haven't really used it that much. I've thought before, since that one kind of has some issues, it could be fun to maybe jailbreak that one, but then I also am kind of like, I don't really know what I'd actually do with a jailbroken PS3 anyway, so not really sure what I want to do with that one. And then the PS3 that I actually use currently, and that I think I've used for every video on this channel, is this PS3 Super Slim. This was also gotten for me by a family member of mine for Christmas, like the year after my other PS3 broke, the previous one, but this one was actually brand new, which I mean, this was like 2017 when I got this one, so it was like a while after the PS3 came out. I'm still kind of shocked that they managed to find a brand new one, but they did, and so that's the one that I've been using ever since then, and I've played a ton of games on it. Also, since it's a newer PS3 compared to the other ones I owned, it's got a bigger hard drive. I think it's got like 500 gigabytes, which I know that doesn't sound huge today, but given that most PS3 games are only like 20 to 30 gigabytes at the most, you can fit pretty much anything you'd want on there. I have not needed to clear space on there at all, and I have downloaded a bunch of stuff onto it and played a bunch of games on it, so yeah, it's got tons of space. Anyway, to start the virtual tour of the PS3, I think probably the best place to start is the disk drive. So, the PS3's disk drive may seem like a weird thing to point out, but it's important to note that the PS3 uses Blu-ray discs. So this is a Blu-ray disk drive, and it can read a lot of stuff, actually. You can use the PS3 as sort of a multimedia center in a lot of ways. It can read, of course, PlayStation 3 games, but it can also read Blu-ray movies, which is really notable, actually, actually, because it was one of those things where Blu-rays were out at the time the PS3 came out, but they hadn't really been like adopted that much, and Blu-ray players on their own were pretty expensive. So if you bought a PS3 alongside having a game console, you also had a Blu-ray player. And if I remember right, in a lot of ways it was actually a pretty good deal, even if you just wanted a Blu-ray player and you weren't sure if you were going to play games on it. So it can play Blu-rays, games. It can also play 3D Blu-rays. I'm not really sure if I'll be able to show you guys anything with that. I do own one 3D Blu-ray, but I don't have a 3D TV, so I don't know if I'll really be able to show anything with that. But it can play 3D Blu-rays, and if you have a 3D TV, you can use it to watch stuff in 3D. It also can play normal DVDs, and it can play CDs. So pretty much any disc format up to Blu-ray it can play. It can't play 4K Blu-rays, of course, but it sure can play a lot of discs. Furthermore, with CDs, you can actually rip them to the console's hard drive, and I'm not really sure why you'd want to do that unless you're gonna just listen to music on your PS3. There are some games that you can do a custom soundtrack with, like I think Burnout Paradise is one of them, but I didn't really see that super often in PS3 games. But nonetheless, it's something you can do. Also, with the games being on Blu-ray discs, that means that you could fit more stuff onto a disc. And the truth is, you didn't really notice a super big difference between Xbox 360 and PS3 with like number of discs. The Xbox 360 used DVDs for its games, and even though you could fit more onto a PlayStation 3's Blu-ray, I don't really think you could tell much of a difference, but there were some times where a difference was obvious. For example, Grand Theft Auto 5 is probably the most well-known example of that. On the Xbox 360, it was on multiple discs. On the PlayStation 3, it was just on one disc. And on PC, it's on like 5 DVDs. And I also want to note specifically the PlayStation 3's Super Slim's door mechanism for the disc drive. I much prefer this to the other iterations of PS3. The other versions of PS3, both the normal Slim and the larger version, they had a disc drive that sort of pulled the disc into it, and I don't really think I ever heard about that failing, but I just like the fact that the Super Slim, it's just a door, so if it failed, it'd probably be easily fixable. Oh, and I saved the first draft of this section of the video, and I completely forgot. The PlayStation 3 is backwards compatible. That's something I wanted to talk about in this section as well. So yeah, all models of PlayStation 3 are compatible with PS1 games. I think it's fully backwards compatible with PS1 games. You can play any PS1 game on a PS3. I've played a bunch of them, and I've never run into any issues with it. Some models of PlayStation 3 also can play PS2 games, but those are kind of rare. The easiest way to tell if you have a backwards compatible, like a PS2 backwards compatible PS3, is for one, it'll be one of the larger models, and it'll have 4 USB ports on the front. Those are kind of rare and kind of expensive. I actually saw one the other day at a local games store that sells broken consoles for a pair, and even for a broken one, they still wanted $100, so they're kind of desirable. But regardless, you can play PS1 games on any PS3, and you can create virtual memory cards. There's a couple of like general emulation, I guess, settings for stuff with like smoothness and turning analog on and off, but I mean, I've never encountered any issues playing PS1 games. I think it's probably one of the best ways to play PS1 games. So, alongside the PS3's great library, you also have the PlayStation 1's great library. On the front of the PS3, it's mostly just the USB ports. As I mentioned earlier, some models of PS3 have 4 USB ports, and of course, that means you can plug more stuff into them, but the main thing for that is just kind of that indicates that it's a PS2 backwards compatible console, which I know that like the USB port number and the backwards compatibility thing seem totally unrelated, but that's just how they happened to set it up. Some models of PS3 also have an SD card port and some other stuff hidden behind a little door above the USB ports, but that's only the larger models and not all of the larger models, so only some of them have that. But as for those USB ports, I mean, they're USB, so they're really useful with a ton of stuff. For one, it's how the controllers get plugged into charge, and the other end of the controller cable is just a normal micro USB, so it's not anything super crazy or special or hard to find a replacement for. And you can also use it to plug in flash drives and hard drives and various other peripherals, actually. I don't think I'm going to talk about the peripherals right yet, but probably later on after I finish talking about the console itself, I'll talk about some of the peripherals. But there's like the PlayStation Eye, which is the camera. You've got like Rock Band game equipment. And again, I mean, it's a USB port, so you could also like charge your phone off of it and stuff if you really wanted to for some reason. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can use with it. I'm just not really thinking of a ton of things off the top of my mind. But again, it was another way that you could also transfer media between your PS3 and other devices. You could plug a flash drive in and put stuff onto your PS3 or take stuff off your PS3, whichever direction, and just really, really useful to have USB ports like that, especially since the PS3 did have internal storage, hard drive, and everything. The PS2 had USB ports also, but I really don't know what they're for. I think like there was some microphones and stuff that used them on the PS2, but yeah, they didn't really serve as much of a purpose on there as they do on the PS3. Then on the side of the console, you have the hard drive. So the PS3 was definitely not the first console to have a hard drive built into it. The original Xbox had that beforehand, and the PS2 had a hard drive add-on thing you could get. I don't know, I never really messed with that myself, but it does have a hard drive, so as I've kind of mentioned a few times before, you can store a bunch of stuff on the PS3. So you can store alongside video game related stuff like your save files and downloadable games and DLC and stuff. You can also save things like videos, pictures, music, all that type of thing onto the PlayStation 3 and view it on your TV. Nowadays, most consoles and most of everything really has built-in storage, and I think sometimes it's easy to forget just how useful this really was when everybody was sort of still used to memory cards and stuff. I mean, the Xbox 360, despite having a hard drive, still has memory card slots. So on PS3, it was awesome to be able to play a game and just save your progress right to your console, or to download DLC and save it right to the console. And that was something that really, really was important on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and I'll talk about a little bit later when I talk about the Ethernet port. You were able to download stuff from the internet and put it right onto your console again, and this is why there was a bunch of DLC and things that were important. But yeah, the hard drive is just cool to have that internal storage, and it's very, very useful. And again, it also enables the PlayStation 3 to be kind of a multimedia center. I know myself, I never really used it that way, but I remember having friends back in like middle school and high school who they would save their music on it, and that would be how they would listen to their music and stuff. They would just listen to it on their PS3. So especially back in the mid to late 2000s, you didn't necessarily have all this stuff on your phone, or you didn't necessarily have all this stuff built in your computer, I guess even. So to have all that functionality in your game console for all of your multimedia needs was really useful. And of course, nowadays you can put an SSD into the hard drive slot as well, and I've heard that that's not really super useful on PS3 actually, because the like reading and writing speed only really goes so high. But nonetheless, if you like solid state stuff, you want your PS3 to be quieter, you can do that as well. And then on the back of the PS3, you have the main video and audio output ports and the Ethernet port. So this is all some pretty important stuff. Of course, you also have the power cord. On the bigger PS3 models, there was also like a power supply switch. It was kind of weird. It wasn't actually the switch to turn off the console. You weren't supposed to use it to do that, but there was like a separate switch on there. But on the Super Slim, at least, I don't know about the normal Slim because I don't have a normal Slim model, but on the Super Slim, it's just a normal power cord. I think it's actually the same one that the PS4 uses as well. Anyway, though, that's a power cord. So next to that, you have one of the video outputs. So this is really interesting. You can use both composite and component cables with it. And I think there's some other video stuff you can do on PS3 with that port, but I'm not totally sure. I know if you go into your video settings on a PS3, there's like a lot of options. But I think that it's something important to remember, and actually the focus of a follow-up video to this video that I'm already working on, that the PlayStation 3 originally shipped with composite cables. And I think that that's something that also is really easy to forget. But this came out in 2006. A lot of people didn't have flat screen HD TVs back then. A lot of people still had CRT TVs that could only accept composite inputs. And it's just kind of crazy when you think about the library of PS3 games and the fact that there's so many of them that look great in HD or have been remastered, all that type of stuff. But when a lot of people first got a PS3, we were still playing it on old CRT TVs. I mean, I know that myself, I played my PS3 on a CRT for a really long time. Then next to that, you have a digital audio out. That is not really something super important. A lot of video game consoles have had that. The PS2 also had one of those, but it is kind of interesting to note that that's pretty much the only like consumer format that uses light to transmit data. That's why it's a red hole on there. Technology Connections actually has a longer video talking about the digital audio out stuff. You can pretty much mostly just use that with a sound bar. I don't even think I've ever seen a TV that has a digital audio input, but it is a really interesting format because it uses light and it's kind of the only one that does that. But but that's like totally unrelated really, because it's pretty common. Next to that, you also have an HDMI port. PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were, so far as I know, the very first game consoles to have HDMI out, and that's kind of important because nowadays HDMI is used for almost everything. Almost all products that can plug into a TV have HDMI output. I know that my current TV, my Samsung TV that I use most of the time that I bought a few years ago, it only has HDMI inputs. So that was like really important and not necessarily super ahead of its time because, again, this was sort of transitioning to HD when the PS3 came out. So more and more stuff was getting HDMI, but it is really cool to see that. And again, that combined with the ability to also use composite out and component out, and I think some other video outputs, you really had like a wide range of video outputs that you could use on PS3. And I'd almost argue that it's like the PS3 and the 360 both sort of had more video output options than any other consoles like ever, really. Because if you look at the PS4 and the Xbox One and the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, those all just have HDMI out. And then if you look beforehand, usually consoles just had composite out or maybe component out also, like PS2 you could have component out, and maybe VGA like the Dreamcast. But for the most part, they did not have 3 or 4 or 5 output methods possible. And lastly, one of the most important ports on the PlayStation 3 and also its twin, the Xbox 360, was the Ethernet port. So neither the Xbox 360 nor the PlayStation 3 were the first consoles to have an Ethernet port. The original Xbox had one before these, and the Dreamcast even earlier sort of had one. It had the dial-up port at first, like the phone line port, and then you could get an Ethernet adapter for the Dreamcast, but those are like really hard to find, but that's beside the point. Anyway, 7th generation of consoles is really where online gaming and downloadable games and DLC and all that type of stuff, well, digitally delivered DLC, where all that stuff became like really important and really viable. Of course, people were playing multiplayer online on PC for a long time before the PS3 came out, and they were sharing maps and stuff for different games online before the PS3 came out. So the PS3 did not invent all of this stuff, but the PS3 and the Xbox 360 are where it really started to pick up pace for consoles. The PS3 in particular, I thought, had an awesome online service because it just offered a lot for pretty much free. So the Xbox 360, you had to pay for Xbox Live Gold to play multiplayer. On the PS3 you didn't, and you still don't have to pay for multiplayer on the PS3 even now, even though on the PS4 and PS5 you do. On PS4 and PS5 you have to have PlayStation Plus to play multiplayer games online. On the PS3, still totally free to play online. And that was awesome because, I mean, it's always fun to play games online, and a lot of games came out during the 7th generation of consoles that ended up becoming mostly focused on online stuff. Call of Duty, of course, has campaigns in a lot of games, but also is very, very well known for multiplayer. That's kind of where it started there. You have Battlefield is a big multiplayer game. You also even had some games that started to be multiplayer only, like MAG and Warhawk, and it just became a really integral part of playing PlayStation 3. Still though, there were also tons of great single-player games that came out for PS3, and you never really needed to hook a PlayStation 3 up to the internet if you didn't want to. You could still update your PS3 in other ways, and games would usually have like the updates on the discs. And so even though the internet was a big part of playing on PS3, it wasn't as important as it is now, where even if you play like a PS5 game offline, a lot of the time you still really can't play like the full game, or you need to download an update or something before the game will actually work. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting middle ground, again, very similar to the video output stuff that I was saying earlier, where you could kind of play it like an older console, but then you could also use more modern stuff too. And alongside just playing games online with your friends and stuff, you could download DLC from the PlayStation Store for your games, and this is kind of where console games started to get a lot of DLC with 7th generation. It became a really important part of some games, actually. I mean, if you really think about it, like Call of Duty games started getting the map packs and stuff later on, and that continued for quite a while, actually. A lot of games started getting add-ons and DLC during this generation of consoles. It's kind of interesting because some developers and publishers and stuff, I think, actually just kind of were messing with it for games that didn't even necessarily need it. If you go through the PlayStation Store on the PS3, you'll find a bunch of games that didn't really need DLC that still got some form of DLC. Like the original Infamous, it got one DLC that was the electricity blades or something. It was just a really simple melee upgrade, and it was free, and it kind of seemed like more of a test to see how it worked than anything else. But again, that was there. I know Just Cause 2 is another pretty good example. There's really not a reason to have DLC for Just Cause 2. to, but there was a couple vehicles and a different parachute you could get for Rico. There was a lot of that type of stuff on PS3, but there was also tons of full-fledged DLCs and stuff. Like I said, Call of Duty, Fallout is another great example, and the Elder Scrolls games, they got like the full DLCs that came out for those games on consoles, and that was really cool. There was a lot of that type of thing. And alongside just DLCs, you had a bunch of games that were just downloadable games, and they either never got a physical release, or you could download any game that came out really onto the PS3. There are plenty of games that have since been delisted, and you can only get physically, or they were only ever released physically, but a lot of games that came out on PS3 you could get digitally. And again though, there was a lot of indie games that came out on PS3 that were digital. So I know that one of the ones that I've played before that I played a long time ago too that was digital only was the game Shank, which is a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up type of game. So there was just a lot of internet usage that really started with 7th generation consoles. Oh, and of course streaming. There was streaming services on PS3. I think that was kind of popular on PS3 once streaming services really started picking up, but you can watch Netflix on a PS3. I think you can use Spotify on a PS3. There's a handful of other various streaming services that came out on PS3. It's kind of interesting actually, because some of those like early streaming services that came out and then fizzled away also were on PS3. But yeah, you can stream video and stuff on there as well. And I just want to throw a quick mention in there for PlayStation Home. I know that that's technically a game, but I feel like it was such an online thing that it's appropriate to throw it in while I'm talking about the Ethernet port. PlayStation Home was an awesome social space, and I think that there's just so many things now that remind me of it, especially with how everybody talks about like the metaverse and stuff constantly lately. Just this digital social space on PlayStation where you could check out game trailers and go to these rooms that were modeled after the games and play mini games and stuff like that. I spent so much time playing PlayStation Home when I was younger, and I'm really surprised in some ways that PlayStation never released a new iteration of it as some of that stuff has kind of come back around in popularity. But there are a couple of like the developers who made stuff for PlayStation Home. There are a couple of PlayStation Home style games out for PS4 and PS5 now, but no like actual PlayStation Home sequel or anything. I should probably also mention the PS3's peripherals a little bit. The PS3 didn't have a ton of peripherals, but it did have some pretty notable ones. So of course, for one, there's the DualShock 3 controller. Now, the DualShock 3 really isn't that much different from the DualShock 2 or the DualShock 4 on PS4. It's all pretty similar, but it did introduce the motion control stuff, so that was kind of interesting. The 6-axis motion controls. Not that many games really made use of it, but if you wanted to mess around with it in some games, it did work kind of surprisingly well actually. And the controllers also had vibration. I know that sounds like a weird thing to note, but there was some sort of, I've heard various stories about it, but since I didn't get my PS3 like on launch day, I'm not totally sure, but I heard some of the first PS3 controllers like didn't have vibration or something because of the motion controls, but eventually the controllers do in fact have motion controls and vibration, at least the normal DualShock 3. As a controller, I think it's fine. I mean, I don't really have anything super special to say about the DualShock 3. I'll be honest, there's more impressive controllers nowadays, like the DualSense for PS5 is like really cool with the triggers and stuff and the haptic feedback, but for just a video game controller, the PS3 feels nice in your hands and everything, and I do kind of like how the analog sticks are next to each other, unlike on the 360 where the analog sticks are not next to each other. I also have heard complaints before that some people don't like how small the PS3 controller is, but I've never really had that issue because my hands are just average size really. One thing the 360 did have over the PS3 though is PC compatibility with the controller. Xbox 360 controllers were pretty much the go-to controller for PC games for a really long time, and they still arguably sort of are, but it was a lot harder for a long time to get PS3 controllers to work on PC for some reason. They just never really were like recognized. You'd always have to download third-party software and stuff, but that's not really a big deal. Again, this video is mostly focused on the actual console, but it was kind of something interesting to note. Speaking of controllers, you also had the PlayStation Move controller, which has developed into something way more important than I think people originally anticipated with it. So the PlayStation Move controller works with the PlayStation Eye camera. The PlayStation Eye camera, I'm gonna be honest, I don't actually remember ever using the PlayStation Eye camera on its own, but I do know that you could use it to video chat with people on PS3. I think I did that with a friend like one time in high school. But yeah, it did have a camera for whatever use you might have a camera for. I know that like iPet was kind of a game that used it, but yeah, that game didn't work super well. At least I never got it to work super well. But anyway, back to the the actual PlayStation Move controller. So the PlayStation Move controller, you probably know it now because it's for PSVR. You use 2 of them for PSVR, but PS Move works on PS3, and there were a lot of games that supported it actually. I remember when it first came out, a lot of people were just kind of saying like, oh, it's pretty much just another Wiimote really, and yeah, the PS3 did sort of just copy the Wii with the motion control things, and they were like significantly late to it. It was a couple years after the Wii came out that the PlayStation Move came out, but in some ways the PlayStation Move actually works better. I know that the glowing ball on the top of the controller kind of looks stupid, but it actually works really well for the motion tracking stuff. Again, there's not that many PlayStation Move exclusive games. I think I actually own like all of the PlayStation Move exclusive games, and they're really nothing too crazy interesting. But no joke, if you go through and you look at a bunch of PS3 games, you'll see that a ton of them are marked with the PlayStation Move compatibility thing. And for some of them, it's just carryover from Wii pretty much. If they had a Wii port, they just ended up using the motion controls also on PS Move. I've never really seen anybody play a lot of games that are compatible with PS Move actually with the PS Move, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean it's not an option. I know that No More Heroes, Heroes Paradise, the PS3 port of No More Heroes, that has normal controller support on PS3, but you can play it with a Move like you would have been able to play it on the Wii. Deadly Premonition has PlayStation Move support for some reason. There was a bunch of games that just had PS Move support for whatever reason. And I mean, those are just the peripherals that I'm thinking of because I can sort of see them in my immediate sight right now. But of course, there were other peripherals too for different games. Like there was that Tony Hawk game that had the skateboard. I mentioned earlier the Rock Band games. They had peripherals that were shaped like guitars and drum sets and stuff like that. So there were a lot of peripherals for PS3 also. But I do think the PS Move is kind of underrated. I think it's actually really cool when you can find a game that you enjoy with it. It's a lot of fun to use. Also, the PS Move controller I think is technically the only controller that works with PS3, PS4, and PS5. Also, another thing that I want to mention about the PS3 that I'm not really sure if I'll be able to capture good footage for or not, but remote play. PlayStation 3 was also the first console to have remote play, and it's another thing that I think people have sort of forgotten about, but the PlayStation 3 did it first. So PlayStation 3 couldn't really do that much with remote play though. It felt kind of like a tech demo. So the PSP was really the companion console, the companion handheld console to the PS3 for a long time, and then the PS Vita also sort of was as well, because the PS Vita also did release while the PS3 was still out. So yeah though, with both the PSP and the PS Vita, you can do remote play to your PS3. I say it feels like a tech demo though, because you can't actually really play like any games with it. I think that they maybe intended to have it be able to play more games, but I don't really think it worked out until PS4. But yeah, you can hook it up with remote play and your PS3 screen will show up on your PSP or your PS Vita, and you can use all of the console utilities and stuff. You can browse the PlayStation Store, I think. You can look at your pictures and stuff, I think. I remember one time in particular using the web browser on my PSP, but actually like it was my PS3 web browser, but I was looking at it on my PSP through remote play, and that was how I found out, I think, about like that Sly Cooper contest they did for Sly Thieves in Time, where it was like you could submit a collectible for the game. That was how I figured that out. That's kind of a weirdly specific memory that I have. I remember you could play 2 or 3 games. There's a list somewhere online of what you can play, and I think one of them is Pixel Junk Shooter, because I think I remember playing that one time through remote play. But again, there's only like 3 games that you can really play through remote play. So you can do it, but it's just not really that functional. On the PS4, it is a lot better. You can play, I think, any PS4 game on your PS Vita through remote play. But if I remember right, there were some people who modded PS3s and stuff, and they were able to play more stuff on their PSP or their PS Vita through remote play, and it was pretty interesting. But yeah, remote play, that is another thing PS3 actually did first. And the PS3 also had an awesome library of games like the Batman Arkham series, the Infamous series, Saints Row, Metal Gear, Skate, BioShock, LA Noire, Fallout, especially New Vegas in my opinion, MotorStorm, all 3 of them, well, excluding Arctic Edge, but Far Cry 3, also Far Cry 4, and Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon came out on PS3, Battlefield 4 and Hardline, and Battlefield 3, No More Heroes, Lollipop Chainsaw, these are some more obscure ones but still really good, Gran Turismo 5, and also 6, Max Payne 3, And Grand Theft Auto 5. I don't know why I didn't grab that one, but Grand Theft Auto 5 especially, really well known. Payday 2, Destiny, handful of Lego games, including a bunch that aren't shown here, Borderlands, and I think Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel, Dead Rising 2. Now, if I remember right, just Dead Rising 2 and Dead Rising 2 Off the Record, those were the only two Dead Rising games released on PS3. But nonetheless, Brutal Legend, another cult classic, and Fear. And this is just small selection of the many popular games that came out originally on PS3 and also Xbox 360 7th generation in general. And of course, I accidentally forgot a whole bunch of other games such as Call of Duty, 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 and Call of Duty. Yeah, all of these came out on PS3. This is one game series, and it had this many releases in one console generation. So, that is pretty much it for this video about my favorite console, the PlayStation 3. This video is maybe going to be a little bit messy. I've kind of recorded the audio for it really out of order, and I started recording some stuff a while ago, and then I had my wisdom teeth out, so then I had to not work on it for a while, and so I have a bunch of footage all over the place, and we'll just see how it all edits together, but I really want to get this done with soon before I go overseas and stuff, as I've mentioned a whole bunch of times. But PS3 is an awesome console, and there's a reason why most of my videos are PS3 games and why I still buy mostly PS3 games and why I play PS3 all the time. It's a really fun console, and like I said, also the Xbox 360 is very equivalent to it in a lot of ways if you're more of an Xbox fan. I know currently also PlayStation 3 games and consoles are not that expensive, so if you haven't bought one before and you want to get one, they're not crazy expensive. Some of the games are getting a little rare, they're going up in price a little bit. I know like Splatterhouse on PS3, that's kind of a rare game that I own. It's like $100, and I recently found a copy of Naughty Bear Gold Edition that was sealed, and that goes for like $100 on eBay, I think, but on Amazon it's cheaper, I'm pretty sure, so I don't know if that's accurate. But regardless, it's awesome, and it's not that expensive to get into. You can get a lot of good PS3 games for under $10 and stuff. And it also, like I've said earlier, functions awesome as a multimedia center. I've bought some Blu-ray movies recently and watched them on PS3 because that's just what I happen to have set up, hooked up to my TV, and it plays 1080p and everything. PS3 can do 1080p, 60 FPS and everything, just not that many games did that, but for movies it works fine. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, I actually am going to have two follow-up videos to this one covering related but sort of slightly different topics, so keep an eye out for those. The one video is going to be me going through my entire PS3 collection. I actually already recorded that one, and then the other one is going to be me talking a little bit more about the video output stuff with like composite cables and things like that. I've only worked on that one a little bit so far, so that's also on the way. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you own a PS3, go dust it off and play some PS3 games, and I'll see you guys in other stuff in the future. Bye bye.